Hi.
Can't hear me?
No.
Watching you get ready to problem
Aaron's gonna make it happen. Don't worry.
Oh.
How about now? There we go. All right, hello everybody. How are we doing tonight? Good. It's very good to see you on this very cold January night. Happy New Year. My name is Kamau. My pronouns are she, they.
And my name is Andy Chen. Pronouns are he, him.
We're very happy to have you with us this evening. We're going to go through some announcements and some housekeeping stuff first. So we want to give some quick shout outs to the members of the St. Louis Poetry Center. You can become a member on our website or use the QR code in the back there. We also want to give a shout out to the Missouri Arts Council and the Regional Arts Council, as well as our partners at the Focal Point.
All right, so the St. Louis Poetry Center has some upcoming events that we want to tell you about. So first, if any of you like trivia, this coming Saturday, we're having a big fundraising trivia. Yeah, she forgot that. I didn't forget though. And so there's information about that in the back. Should be lots of fun, and it really helps out the St. Louis Poetry Center. We have an upcoming Sunday workshop with Aaron Coleman and Kichi Quippers. That's February 15th. And then they'll be reading at the Observable Reading Series the next day, which is the 16th of February. Otherwise, know that if you need them, the restrooms are out that door and then to the left. You can also get drinks next door if that is of interest to you. What's up to our Facebook Live / YouTube friends over there. And then finally, so this is McAllen, my first time co-curating this together. We were taking
our first official.
Yeah. So with that in mind, if you come for, we have some new ideas for you, some new things that we're going to do today. So the first thing we'd love to do is, if this is the first time you've ever been,
And you're feeling brave.
to Poetry at the Point and brave, could you raise your hand just so we can say hi and wave? Yeah. Okay.
Welcome.
This is a lot. That's actually a lot more than I was expecting.
Yeah, this is wonderful. Welcome. We're really glad that you're here.
Yeah. The other thing we're excited about is, so if you've come, you know that we like to end the reading with a conversation with the poets. So we're still going to do that. But if you have a question as you're listening, taking in this work, if you have a question that you'd like to throw into the conversation, in the back, there are some colorful Post-it notes and some writing utensils. So at some point, maybe between the readers, if you want to sneak back there and jot down a question, I'll grab them at the end. We probably won't have time for all of them, but I'll grab them and
We'll do our best.
Yeah, we will. Yeah. Okay.
All right, and we're gonna go ahead and kick things off with a poem as usual. So Andy's gonna take care of that tonight.
No, I got it. Why don't you do this, since you picked the poem and you remember the poet's name?
Absolutely.
Tell us who this is by.
All right. So we're gonna start off tonight with a Danica Kelly poem. It's called Home, a Primer. There is no place I return to but the mind, shadow of texture, of scent, pressure. Someone's hand cradling the back of my head. Breath. Eyes squeezed shut are open. A sound. No place but always. Long for what is fleeting, what's fled. No place called home. Home, not a place but sensation. The memory of it. Of waste and the silence that follows. Light, it's leaving. Memory, yes. And the language to conjure it. Weak magic in the dark, but enough. Enough. It's too warm for winter, though winter comes. The sun shifted south, and the song sparrows, who make in the hedge a home at the bath, which I filled only this morning, drinking. All right. First, I'm very excited to introduce this poet. I just met her this night, but she is the epitome of grace, so I'm very happy to have her grace our stage. Lydia Golitz is a second-year MFA student at Washington University in St. Louis. She was born and raised in Chicago. Her work is published in Black Warrior Review, Seneca Review, Washington Square Review, and elsewhere. Please give it up for Lydia.
Thank you both so much for inviting. Can you hear me okay? Is that good? Okay. Thank you both so much for inviting me. I'm so excited. Yeah, when you, and thank you all for being here as well. It's so good to see you. Yeah, when asked me for my bio like a couple months ago, I sent in a super short one because I sort of feel like I'm in this like sort of like caterpillar cocoon goo with my work right now, where I'm like sort of in between what like I can say artistic statement wise, that kind of thing. So I collected a bunch of poems here that sort of like I feel like are sort of where I began and then sort of end where I'm kind of going. So I'll talk through a little bit of that. But yeah, I always sort of think that like my poetic imagination began sort of being raised like in this very traditional Catholic church. And I started writing poetry around age 13, 14, 15, and I started to see sort of like this disconnect between sort of what I wanted this moral body to be and then what I actually felt I was coming into, right? And so that was sort of where my poetry started, and I became super interested in like the feminist grotesque and like body horror and like trying to figure out this thing. So I think that is like a way to frame some of what it is I'm about to read, but I think it sort of departs and descends and all of that in different ways. So yeah, I will just begin, and then I'll check in and chat a little bit more after the first few. Okay, I'll start my timer too, so I know where I'm at. Lament. Here is my desperate garden, my lease of sand and gravel, where St. Catherine lies with her head off in the yellow dirt. The dove from heaven, who fed her once a day in exile, keeps arriving at my door. I cannot eat what he has to give me. Honey ham and cantaloupe, roughage from a demolition, it is all bathed in the same detestable, inedible light. They said she was kind to unmarried girls and the knife sharpener. The golden wasps in her hair are making more of themselves. When they first tried to kill me, the wheel of torture snapped into a million pieces. Today I purred at the television, spat at myself to keep cool. White pigeon. Old men die because the wild cherries look like breasts more than they look like wild cherries. Crated, red slick across their lips and holding buried treasure, fetid lace, upper heritage of pearls. To be ugly is not to be bad, but I distract myself with the bird lost in the eaves of the chapel. Her tufted neck, incisor for a face. These tricks I learned when I was young, when the cuckoo clock would toll among the white votives, when the clown faces of the dead to make me laugh. Party line. Unkissed kazoos. Odd children, unsung. 3 mouths to the body of the telephone. Leashed to the wall, kneeling on the kitchen banquette. Lady on the party line thinks we are her daughters calling from normal. No, we are ghosts. Odd children scary. Odd children seen through. Loose teeth threaded to the knob of the door. Swing, strange new smile. Happy and righteous. All the hounds in the city escaped from their backyards the same day that my mother stood on the cerulean lip of her swimming pool, dressed in a terry cloth two-piece and plastic sunnies. I have lived my whole life knowing my mother, but never knowing my mother at the edge of the swimming pool. She does not look at the water. She does not drink the water, does not swim. What else are you supposed to do with water? The hounds click their long nails against the people of the town. Their ribs cling against one another like one big dinner bell. My mother jumps into the cold swimming pool while everyone else is hiding their children from the hounds. If I have children, I will dress my children in terry cloth two-pieces, in plastic sunnies. I will name them Happy and Righteous. I will sleep outside their bedrooms. I can see their whole future shining like the cerulean lip of the swimming pool. Happy and Righteous look at their reflections in each other's plastic sunnies. They will put on their terry cloth two-pieces today. They will put on their terry cloth two-pieces tomorrow. They will drag my mother from the swimming pool so that I don't have to. People everywhere are helping each other escape cold swimming pools. People everywhere are falling in love. Our mail getting mixed up. Our hounds touching noses under the chain gate. Pet. Found a fawn and kept the fawn. Dragged my fawn to the water. Told my fawn to drink. Then my fawn grew up. Suddenly, I had nothing left to drag. I want another fawn. Hoofed ruminant, no bones through her skull. I will spit into her mouth my cud of white bread. Fawn come, fawn stay. Give me a fawn with a little satin bow around her spotted neck on my birthday in a cardboard box with holes punched through, so I can peer at the fawn one eye at a time. I have found love in the narrow field of vision. Without the fawn, I am just like the carpet my fawn liked to pee on. I am ugly. I am blue. I am nailed to the floorboards. So these next poems, just checking my little timer here. These next poems, so I'm in my second year at the MFA at WashU. Shout out all the audience, yeah. And a lot has changed in that time writing-wise, but one of them, an obsession that I've acquired for some reason in the past year has been clowns. And I think there's some connection there with, you know, the sort of, with what I talked about too, with where my poetic imagination began, sort of this access of humiliation, humility, risk and play, sort of contending with having a body and like being thwarted by one body. But in my clown research that I've embarked on, I found this stock character named Pierrot, and some of you might be familiar with like the look of Pierrot. He has like the painted white face and the tear. He's like the classic sad clown figure. And he's changed a lot through history. He's like first began in the 17th century, and he's like morphed as like to be a symbol of like mystic everyman who's really sad. He's also typically just portrayed as like a lovesick guy. And I sort of went through, you know, a big breakup in the past year, and I think I took Pierrot sort of as this like imaginary friend on my like journey through these emotions. And so he's appeared in a lot of poems since, and sort of the clownscape has evolved as it's gone on. So so these poems are all sort of engaging in the clown space, and that's sort of the trajectory that we're on. Okay, so this is called I Put on Pierrot's Face. They held me against my 12th birthday cake and loved me, ate at my face with their fingers. I've never washed up, forever flush-cheeked, sticky-fleshed, saccharine-sick, grand wasp lure, the self's only egress. Even now, liaising in the confetti of duck down, my eyelet bed covers tutued with me and my complicated pajamas. The flies kiss me with their fingers. If I could tell my past self where I was, I wouldn't. I'm afraid she would not think I was happy. Always falling down the steps of the piano recital, achieving flight at the expense of the body. Oh, there you are, my golden barrette. Do it again. Part long doors. Usher my party in. This one's called Pierrot Does an Impression of Me. Oh, my moon, my pussy bow, where is my tear dew? I clappered school bells, supper bell, doorbell, ha 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 ha, like a trampoline, tired dog, ha ha, like an empty room, laughs back. Close-up magic. I guess my beauty really is only like the moon. Your left buttock beside your right buttock. Cartoon breasts against the desert sky. They put a dog bone in the reliquary. My sheep graze your lush and perpetual green. She slipped on her lover's toe ring. The doorbells of matrimony. Bark, 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 bark. I take a number and wait to be called. Love lasts as long as a worm. Rehearsal. I dance like a tethered dog. I dance like a dove. At night, I practice the straight line. It has been so long since we've been light. In the morning, I try to wake someone beautiful from their deepest sleep. Hello, these things take time. Wilting pirouette, then pirouette. I was stung by a golden wasp, so I had to leave the tunnel of love. I left through the mouth of the clown, counted the teeth. 32 bald men. I moved my tongue over each of their 32 bald faces. That strange taste. It didn't streak down the whole body. Breath of the face. I'm on a tightrope, releasing common scarlet under my pigtails. No, I'm not. I'm waiting for my father's golden minivan. I dream that I am a heavy fur coat. I put myself on. And then I just have one more. This one, it's sort of like a mini tradition that I have with only myself, which is that anytime I do a reading, I like to read this poem last. It's kind of a goodbye. I wrote it when I was like 18, 19. It's like my first and last attempt at writing a pantoum. And yeah, that's it. Thank you all so much for listening. Yeah, okay. Love y'all. Okay. To everyone who I've ever happened to kiss was kissed in alphabetical order by last name, was kissed like a list of butterflies by last name. I read the encyclopedia like a list of butterflies, blue morpho, great egg fly. I read the encyclopedia about the butterfly tent that caught on fire, blue morpho, great egg fly, leopard lace wing, sleepy orange. The butterfly tent is on fire. Goodbye, leopard lace wing, sleepy orange, alphabetical order. Goodbye, everyone who I ever happened to kiss. So, thank you.
Thank you. I love a pantoum. It works. Come on in. Come on. Yeah, have a seat wherever, please. Before I introduce our second reader, Kamau, just want to remind us if beautiful work inspired a question, something we'd love to know. There are those Post-its back there that we can work into the conversation. Yeah, Aaron's waving. My friend Kamau is from St. Louis, currently enrolled in his third year as an MFA poetry candidate at the University of Virginia. He previously received a Bachelor of Science in Ecology and Evolutionary Biology from Yale University and spent time before his MFA program working as a high school teacher at John Burroughs School in St. Louis. He continues his love of ecology through his writing, while also exploring community, love, music, and the importance of the aforementioned in the presence of environmental degradation and systemically permitted/propagated discrimination and violence, with the hope of understanding himself and the world around him. Kamau Walker.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the St. Louis Poetry Center for having me, and thank all of you for being here. And thank you, Lydia, for a wonderful reading. I will hop into it. The only thing that I want to say is, as was mentioned, ecology, very important to me. What is truth? What is fact? And especially, what I need you to know is if an ecological thing comes up, it is a fact. I want all my poems to be like readable by my old lab managers. That's all. I drag behind me a chain of flowers, like the ones I asked the girls to weave and hang across my forehead in elementary school, because my fingers lack sufficient deftness to convince my teachers to eventually have my big, delicate, who spins to the room as Aubrey lifting above her head as she adorns me in scotch tape and bubble wrap for our fashion show that started 2 hours late in her imagination. Because I'm finally home, after months of her asking for me to pick her up from school because she's 6 and doesn't understand distance as something that we must surpass, and for her tornadoes are still an afterthought to dogs with strange names that almost sound too human. So when I call my sister from another state and Aubrey picks up the phone to ask when I will be home again, and then why I'm walking a dog who isn't mine, and then why his name is Julius, and then how my day was, it takes her 13 minutes to mention that the roof is partially missing, and the power is out, and half the city is crumbling, and though she doesn't understand it, it's mostly the black half, so I ask her if she's talked to everyone. And she says my aunt's car is under the same tree, that my father will have to saw it into pieces so my granny can leave her house, and down the block neighbors are searching through piles of brick, and that the clouds were gone within minutes of the storm. The sun was over everything, and everyone we love is alive and still housed. And today I'd rather smile knowing none of the graves will call for my hands to lay the flowers. So when Aubrey asked about dogs again, we do. So a little bit about my writing. Currently we're working on our thesis. My thesis, if it turns into a book, entitled The 27 Club. All to know is that the 27 Club refers to largely musicians, but other artists at large who all passed away at the age of 27. This book has been inspired by musicians who may be a part of that club or may not be. One who shows up quite frequently is DMX. This is also where I make the preface of, I want to have a shirt that says, I promise I'm only mad at God in my poems. This thing in my granny. If you hear something, it's just a poem. This one titled Ode to DMX, ending in 4 horsemen. Every stray got a name. Some just can't stop until they find another set of teeth to drag out of before dropping it across their shoulders as trophy and prayer. And eyes shut and swollen into knowledge, I could show you how to empty any man into a rectum after claiming his jewelry before it can be rinsed down. With a gun in his hand, because I listen to so many rappers, and unfortunately, most of them have realized that Cobain can rhyme with both blow or bang, depending on whether you want the action or the music. The music, of course, is never his music, but that of a bullet. Tempo is best kept with the cock of a gun. I couldn't tell you if Cobain was a drummer or a singer. All I know is Nirvana has an album cover with a baby in a swimming pool, and that baby grew up to be a man who sued them for laying him naked in front of the world, even though he was loved. I suppose I also know my Uncle Rudy was a chef for Nirvana for some leg of their tour, so I could know more if I had cared to ask. I know Cobain was 27. I know you know what that means. I know so many rappers that didn't even make it that far. When Kurt Cobain shot himself, his mother said, I told him not to join that stupid club, and strangers still argue about whether she defined club by age or addiction. Statistically, 27 isn't that special. It could just as easily be 56 or 32. Musicians die more than young people. Niggas. As a child, I was still convinced I would live to old age. I thought that meant 60. Eventually, enough rappers saying we wasn't supposed to get past 25 that I believed them. I mean, I have eyes after all. And when I opened them at 26, I sprinted. The niggas I know, I mean, the ones who helped me keep my own tempo, the niggas I loved who held a gun to their own temple ultimately used something different. I never asked what, I preferred to imagine the body still brimming. When his note was written, Cobain said he just couldn't get himself to care about all the strangers screaming his name. I don't pretend to understand, but many rappers claim that they do. My mother was always thankful that her father emerged from all his jazz without a needle. With just the music. When people talk about my grandfather, they don't know his name, or that he died at 84, Really, the people just know that he held the saxophone in his left hand and the beat in his right. Statistically, 84 is a great number. People don't mention the way that my grandfather died, so it comes with the blessing of not knowing how. He still left me with a letter, though, well, through his daughter, who's left a journal for me counting the years I've spent on this earth. The first time she showed it to me, I was 25, then 26, then you know the rest. So this next poem is from a fictional world that I've been writing in my head because I like to do that. So if you don't understand something, just know this is a religious world building poem for that fictional world, and that might be why. We only understand God through the lurch in our stomachs as we watch embers chase clouds after fire. As though gravity does not concern itself with the dead, not all knowledge to be held, still God holds on to us like darkness cradles a body in an empty house. In the beginning, God was just God, but then God breathed, or perhaps we call it breath to better understand how God became God, and God, and God. God was lonely, and God was indifferent, and God was so angry. So God stitched embers into the sky, and God was eager to hold anything that her hands bled rivers, and God was so bored his teeth grew into mountains. And God cried until her tears coalesced into gravel and dirt and fungus and wolves and protists and willows and dragons and lilies. And my daughter asked me how we got here. The truth is, God is only God if a little girl wakes up and paints a third ember under the blade of her shoulder. God only became God and God and God and God to cope with being human. God resents most humans for daring to think of God as human too. This next poem is which is a really cool place that you all should go see if you can. It's a one ecosystem, and that's great. I imagine death as an estuary, opening towards something larger, perhaps incomprehensible, filtered through teeth thick and spindled like the roots of mangroves. The first learn of the ocean, my aunt had sculpted it with manatees. She gifted me one, soft and bloodless as sugarcane. I held him in the bathtub, dreaming of the open water. In the Everglades, a seed from rock. From the trees sprout new seeds, then new trees in kind. They hold each other against the water. Over time, their leaves carve a shield against the flame, a simple moat across the stone. Survival is often predicated on embrace. Depicting death this way implies, I imagine, rivers akin to sleep, without which we learn nothing. My aunt taught me to only voice nightmares. Speaking a dream precludes it from reality. Forgive me for not sharing the deepest parts of myself. Yes, I know I'm supposed to love sawgrass. Like limestone, I'm afraid of what happens when the water runs still. In the Everglades, the water is always moving. So slow, no one notices. I want to run like this. I want to sleep and then one day be gone. As an evolutionary biologist, I was taught extinction bears no judgment aside from fitness. Languages, habits, people, species, forests, rivers die. I dreamed of death as terror and fantasy. I found an alligator hissing inside of a road, and there was a time I wanted to be his meal. I shoved myself into an estuary. Then I saw my first manatee and jumped into the ocean. In the past, which is still farming of sugarcane and rice. They carved the world into less and less sleep, held the water beneath the tongue of profit or survival, depending on perspective, until the trees and grass forgot its feel. Now the world is melting into nightmares where the trees are steeped in salt, the irony of dying by both water and drought, where the jagged metal climbs higher than the trees, where the manatees have all the room to roam but none of the bodies, when everyone is waiting for the water to rise, just to siphon it through their own gums. That's really true. When I was a kid, my dream death scenario was to be eaten by a crocodile or alligator. I thought that I could be a useful meal to a reptile. These last two poems are connected to each other. The first one is a kind of like preface to the other. I don't know whether they're going to show up in relation to each other in the project, but just felt like saying that. The first one is entitled As Is. There is no more mercy, just gold. I woke to keratin across, although a few thousand times before this life, I woke at soil, or my father's first breath. What the ocean said to the shore, I waited, counting liquor by the thread, my eyes swollen, my palm reaching, my mouth inevitable. Of course, there was also you, bathing in ink, clamoring against the stone. The next one is entitled, Is Akin To. My father calls me like a lantern under snakeskin. Seems like a waste of a prayer. If there is a person named God, I promise, that nigga smoke weed. Smoke is useful in the graveyard. My father says I'm forgetful. I remind him oak trees owe a lot to squirrels and their forgetfulness. Clean is a myth. When I woke, I was already wearing size 4 tennis shoes. They were laced. I don't know by who. I don't trust nobody that can't remember my granddaddy name. Some days I struggle to look in the mirror. God is clean. He was there next to the crows before they dropped whiskey bottles on the common folk. Before their feathers turned oil spills, still, folks would rather kill a lanternfly than walk to work. I mean, what a way to imitate God. What a thing to call life. Look closely, and you can taste the clouds breathing like a rusted child. Black death always has the same backdrop, and it is laced in gold. Understanding often gets lost in the weeds. There are weeds, by the way, just niggas you don't want on your lawn. That's why I water my niggas like orchids. Of all my flaws, Lauda found this one easiest to forgive. She is the only woman I ever told I love you. I said it in her native tongue so it would feel less true. Then one morning, the thread snapped clean. Some amnesia is aspirational. Today, I am responsible for the suffering of my father. I made a choice, kind of like God when he promised his only child clean. You still want to talk about faith? The future just waits war, and that nigga only knows how to deliver news with the gentleness of a rhinoceros horn. All because your granddaddy ain't get to do nothing but water a couple oak trees. Please, folks would rather kill off to work. Never mind. After seeing God bleed, nobody remember their path to heaven. With the right drummer, though, even the devil move. Brings the smoke. You might find yourself in a field and you out here chasing after every drummer with a closed mouth. Remember, God don't got no mirrors. That's how he stays clean and draped in all his gold. Say your prayers. It might feel a little less true, but heaven can still fit in a bottle. I know because I took it to the graveyard, buried it with some lantern flies. Wasn't no niggas there. It wouldn't be called a yard, just a parking lot. Thank you.
We're gonna have the poets come join us for some Q&A. I just told Aaron I'm not really sure how to get this microphone out, so bear with us. Come back. That was so much easier than I anticipated. I was prepared to be up here with my wife looking at me like, how did they ask you to do this? All right. You both were lovely and wonderful, and we appreciate you so much for doing this. You both crushed it. You really did. So, we've got questions for you prepared, and then we'll kind of see what comes up in the crowd if anything pops up. So, listening to you both read, I think that Andy and I noticed most. Talk about a lot, and you both have that in your poetry. So can you both tell me, what do you think it is that draws you most to writing about nature, and how do you think that serves your poems? Either of you can go first.
For me, I'm a reptile-obsessed child, and I say that currently because still, whenever I talk about lizards, I turn into a 4-year-old. And I feel like genuinely it's just, for me, you write about what you love and what you see the world through. I see the world either through music or through nature, and so it kind of just always shows up because it's magical to me.
Yeah, and the ride over here, we were both talking about how we were reptile kids. Or I was an aspiring reptile kid, but I was never allowed. So you're like a realized reptile kid. But I think I think in my play, like I kind of want to be an animal. Like there's like so much that I admire about like like embodying sort of what I'm not, or like the landscapes around me. So I think that's maybe I think of it, where it's more of something to explore like physically and sonically maybe than even just as an observer.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love what you said about embodying an animal, because I feel like that definitely was coming through as well. It's also an interesting idea. Like, I would like to embody an animal a lot of the time rather than embodying this human self. Kamau, one of the things you said was, "I promise I'm only mad at God in my poems," when you were reading. And one of the things that we wanted to ask you guys about was how you see the idea of God and faith and divinity interacting with nature in your poems, but also just maybe how you use those ideas as a vessel in your poetry as well. It doesn't have to be necessarily related to the nature, but I think those things are interacting in some way.
Yeah, I think for Mad, I think I keep describing him as like he's like a bad boyfriend. Where like there's so much care and love in my relationship with God, like as a child and then growing up, and now I sort of come in and out of that like love, and I think my poems sort of maybe explore sort of like that push and pull relationship, which I think does feel cyclical. It does feel kind of natural in that way. Yeah, I think that's like primarily how I think of it. And I think in terms of like being an animal too, like sort of all living creatures sort of existing on that same plane is maybe something I explore. Yeah.
I think for me, a lot of it too, I think that some words that are really poetic just because of everything that they hold. And I think that God is one of those, because there's so many different depictions of God. There's so many different like responsibilities ascribed to God, things of that nature. And I feel like as such, it means that when you say God, there's a lot to carry, but also a lot of people have a connection to God, even if it's through agnosticism or atheism or whatever it is. And so oftentimes I find myself including God in a poem because it just feels like I need to be mad at somebody. Or there's this like question of responsibility, all that sort of things, but also like thinking of nature. One of the things about evolutionary biology is you study a lot of evolutionary history, right? And there's always this like question of like, oh, evolution versus creation and things of that nature. But I think that I find evolution is probably one of the biggest to believe in God to me, because there's so many things where it's like, wow, I can't believe that this happened. Like even with like natural selection, all this kind of stuff, like why do giraffes have necks like that? Or just like things like that, where it's like, my headcanon is that this is a world building by God, and evolutionary history was also how to like justify why there are animals that look the exact same in like places of the world that are nothing to do with each other. Like, oh yeah, convergent evolution. But so it's also like, I think that God's influence on nature is something that I'm agnostic, but like sometimes very much feel, other times I'm like, who knows?
I think God is a good guy to blame, personally. It's a good one. All right, good. I think, and you know, we'll see if a question comes out of this while I'm meandering around in my head, but I think something that I find so interesting about the intersection of these things in your poetry, both of you, is that nature is something we can look at and research and we can question it, but oftentimes we find things that are factual there, right? And with God and religion and divinity and faith, there's a lot more questioning involved in that, where we can't back them up in some way. And so I'm curious, do either of you feel like writing poetry, these things, you're writing towards questions about something, and like maybe what some of those questions are, if you feel comfortable sharing those with us?
Yeah, I definitely feel like my process generally, it has to be like of discovery. I find if I like go in knowing what I want to write about, or even having like something to say, it doesn't ever really work. Like I think I have to enter with a question and then write towards like more question. I think that feels like sort of just, I don't know, maybe that's just my project as I'm writing. But I think, what are the big questions that I have now? I think mine definitely with God, sort of as I talked about, like a lot of questions of like, to him, like what does my physical form do with like this idea of like what I should be, which had to do a lot with like purity and all of that. And I think now I'm sort of like asking those questions from a place of like, well, I know I'll never achieve like being the perfect human or like the perfect whatever. So how do I contend? And I think that's where the balance came in. Is a lot of like they really contend with the shame, or that's like that's the project of being a clown is like having to sort of fail publicly or in a silly or like use the body to show those like shortcomings. So I think that's like in the past year sort of where the question started and like kind of now where it's going towards.
I think that for me, I'm not typically motivated by questions in poetry. I was accused of, sounds like they were wrong, but they were probably just right, but of not coming to a poem until I already feel I know how I feel about everything. And I think that that's not to say I don't discover new things when I'm writing or things of that nature. But like with the Kurt Cobain poem, for example, I was like, okay, if I'm going to title this thing the 27 Club, I should have some 27 Club members. Okay, Kurt Cobain. I was like, well, all I know about Kurt Cobain is that he shot himself because that's all rappers talk about. And so I just started writing from there. And like, there's a place of discovery where I'm open to seeing new things, but I don't have a question I'm looking for. It's kind of like, as I start writing, whatever comes up, comes up. And I think that I'm afraid, to be honest, of a lot of the things that I have the biggest questions about, of like poetry. I have like preference to investigate them first and then try to write. But I've been challenged to try to find poems that are in themselves questions, and maybe one day I'll do that.
No, I think that's interesting. I love hearing both of your approaches because I think sometimes when I go in to write a poem, I am asking a question, and other times I know very clearly how I feel about something, right? And so it's a fine line to walk. Okay, we do have an audience question, and it is a good one. You both had audience as a motif for music, for magic, for clowns. How do you think about your audience when you write, if you do?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's like I had to investigate this a lot. This audience kept coming up sort of like without me even being conscious of it. When I was an undergrad, a friend of mine and I would, like, one of the purposes of when we would do readings is like we would talk about how we kind of just wanted to make people laugh in the audience, or not even laugh, but have some sort of like visceral reaction. Like we didn't like it to be so quiet. So we would put insane things into our poems to sort of just like garner a reaction. And I think that to this day, like I still feel like my audience is always kind of laughing at me or like wants to laugh at me. And like maybe that's like something psychological I should explore, of like feeling always maybe a little made fun of. But I think that's like, I think again, playing into like maybe the shame part of it too, of like a sort of like an audience that like wants you to fail for some sort of like purpose of not necessarily entertainment, but just also like in sort of vulnerability and wanting to see humanness reflected back on them. So I think that's like where I'm at with audience right now. There's been times where I've like really feared an audience, but right now I'm feeling sort of a kinship. Like I think we can vibe, me and my audience. Yeah.
I'd say for me, that's one of the biggest things about being in the MFA program, where I've had to think about audience a lot more, because prior writing was very much an audience itself or an audience of like a specific person I was writing to. And so I've been having to learn to think about audience. And also, same person who mentioned the question thing to me in our meeting, that they felt like, they said that for them as a Black writer, they felt oftentimes they imagined their audience as adversarial, and that they were putting a lot of effort into trying to imagine a caring audience looking at their work and like what that looks like. And I think that did resonate on some level, where I think I have some poems where there is like a caring audience imagined, but I do think my default is adversarial. And so like there weren't any in these poems, but I have multiple poems that I've read in the past like 3 months where I actively tell the audience, no, like I hate you, or like I've actively wanted you to die, or stuff like that, because there is this adversarial kind of relationship. And I don't know, it just kind of feels like I'm fighting with audience.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think sometimes, I don't know, it's interesting to think about like who and what we're writing for, right? And whether the people on the end of that are caring or not. My hope is that they are. I think oftentimes they are. Before we jump into like the last couple questions we have, do we have any other audience questions? Maybe somebody didn't want to get up and write on a piece of paper, which I respect. Just do a little chat. Yeah.
Hi Lydia, hi Kamau. I'm wondering, because both of y'all have fictional narratives in your poems, and imagine narratives with an existing character, or an imaginary friend, or a historical character, or just creating a whole world, like world building altogether. So I was wondering how you think of using, poetry as the form to, do these imagination and fictional narratives.
That's a fabulous question. Really fabulous question.
You go first this time.
Truth be told, I did this in a thing for a variety of reasons. Some of them because I like poetry, other of them for life. And when I was there, I was like, oh no, I'm going to be here for 3 years, but I also want to make this, like I've been writing this story all this time and I actually want to work towards it. And I managed to make my comfortable with that was to use poetry to do that so I could do both at the same time. So I'd say that mine was partially out of emotional necessity and otherwise just like because it's fun. I think that like poetry that's not bogged down in truth is like a lot more where you can go. My first poem that I wrote, not for a school assignment, was about a little brother who doesn't exist, and it just feels better in the sense of like being able to use metaphors more widely without having to worry about like, oh, is this violating poet audience trust or things of that nature. I feel like.
Yeah, I had a lot of the same considerations. We're both writing these right now, and I think that is also kind of like stuck in the project world of it. I feel like has changed how I think about like these characters that appear in my writing. And yeah, similarly, like wanting to flesh out what these people are doing that keep appearing in my poems. And for me, it was like a lot of like the mother figure or like a sister would keep arising and that sort of thing. And I think for me, like I like fiction has never super worked for me because I get so bogged down in plots and knowing what happens next. And I'm sure there's like craft elements that I could be using to get or avoid those things or get out of those things. But I think poetry to me, like the nature of having fragmented narrative makes more sense in my brain of just being able to see pieces of these people and then that those sort of like spaces of like cracks or absences also having a lot of meaning in and of itself. So I think that's I think I like sort of the that sort of like web-like nature as opposed to maybe like a linear narrative. And so I think that's sort of how I'm trying to construct these different narratives within sort of one project.
Thank you. And audience, before we move into wrapping up, hello.
Hi. How do you know when the story is done? Like, is there a feeling? Do you ever have moments where you go back to the story and edit something or add or remove something?
I might be making this up, but I feel like people have told me that Michelangelo said something like the like great art is never done, you just stop working on it. I don't know. That's a very bad paraphrasing of the person like I said that. But I feel like that's true. I mean, even on individual poems, I find myself frequently like, am I done with this? And like coming back and all that sort of stuff. With the stories, genuinely, for the one that I've been creating in my head that's been inspiring my secondary project that I've been working on kind of in the background, I kind of never want it to be over. Like in my head, it's actually like all of my life, it will be continued because I care about characters in addition to like just the story itself. So it's like, I want to like fill their life with as much as I can. So it's kind of like, oh, here's this moment. And sometimes I can go back, but like most of the time it's just new scenes that get imagined and new places that I want to explore and go into.
Yeah, totally. I like these characters and these stories as lifelong too. I think they will kind of keep emerging as I grow and as I have new questions. Yeah, and I think that's okay in terms of like something mean, that is something that I've never finished anything in my life. And I just feel like that's something that, I sort of, like I always tell my students, I'm like, a lot of art is just decision making. And it's like, there's no like hierarchy of good or better or worse decisions. Like you just have to make a decision. And I still struggle with that so much. I always want there to be like a right decision or right thing. But I'm in the process of acceptance right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I distinctly remember one of my mentors, probably one time we were in a poetry workshop and we were asked, when do you know the poem is done? And he was like, when it's published. And we were like, but even, like there's still things to refine. The story never really ends. It kind of goes on forever until you decide to let it go. So one of the things that we asked at our last reading, which we thought would be good to bring up again because it had some pretty positive feedback. It's no secret that there's a lot of shit going on in the world right now. And so that brings into question the poet's role in society, poetry's role in society, art's role in society. And so I'm curious to hear from both of you what you think art's role in society is right now, what poetry's role is, and what a poet's responsibility is.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot, and I think for me, like being a teenager and discovering poetry was so important because it was a space for me to like try things and sort of like rebel against what I had been receiving up until that point in my life. So like rebel against the church, my parents, my teachers, like all this stuff. Poetry was a space for me to kind of like try that. And even like I always loved reading and writing and seeing like a poem, even just like these sentences like broken on the page. Like it felt so radical to me. I was like, oh, then we can do anything. Like I was like, if you can do that, like then this feels so possible. And so I feel like that is always kind of what poetry presented for me in my life. It can go to sort of to just like I think like break out of these systems of thought that I have been given. And I feel like that's what I try and encourage. Like this is my first year teaching, so I have a lot of teaching thoughts, but like even with my students, they so much want rules, and they want the grammar to be want a syntax, and I think like just getting them comfortable like unfamiliarity and like trying new things I think has served them also like in our conversations. And I think the world, we need to like practice that type of thinking, I think a little bit. So yeah.
I'm going to try to make this brief because there are a lot of thoughts that I have, and a lot. I'm going to quote a lot of people. This one's actually a true quote. James Baldwin, in my favorite essay of his, Nothing Personal, says, where the poet can live, the people can sing, and it goes the other way around. Where the poet can sing, the people can live. And I think that, to me, part of what that is kind of like poetry and poets is kind of a temperature check of like an emotional record keeping, where there's like the factual record keeping, but there's also how are people feeling at this time and what are people resonating with. There's one level there. There's also this book called The Great Derangement, which is basically, in short, about how future generations will look back at our current time and be upset with people who create fictional media because there isn't active inclusion of climate crisis. And the whole book's point is kind of that like culture is shaped by everything, from architecture to the way that people inhabit themselves in like public service to the way that people like design laws, like all these things affect culture. And so every single person has a responsibility to build towards a culture that they desire. And so I think that there is that role there. But the last thing that I'll say is I also think, though, that I think poetry is important, but I think poetry is important in the way that everything is important when you are intentional about it. But I don't think that poetry is so important to the point of like, I guess what I'm trying to say is I think that Kaveh Akbar, when he came to read in Charlottesville, had mentioned how the poem is not the work. Like the work is done outside of the poem, and then afterwards you can come in and do work. And so to talk about these things, like I'm someone who I'm not really doing much work right now. Like I am selfishly taking this time to myself. But like thinking about poets like Tongo Eisen Martin, who does so much to work with like prison reform and things for that nature, in addition to all of his poetry, which I find very impactful, like that's someone who's doing the work and doing the poems. And then last, for real, Tupac quote, where he said, "I may not be the one to change the world, but I guarantee I will spark the mind that will change the world." And I think that that's like the other piece of art of either holding people in places where they need refuge or kind of being the inspiration to people about something that maybe won't really hit them until like 7 years later, but eventually will like resonate in a way that might push forward change.
Thank you so much for both of your answers. Those were wonderful. You know, I hope that tonight with you guys being here that you felt like you were in a safe space, in a space where you could enjoy some poetry, have some joy, take a step away from everything that's going on right now. We like to wrap up by doing this thing called Gathering Paradise, which I inherited from Kenneth. And we like to ask if you have any art, what's music, a book, a collection of poetry, a movie, anything that's really inspiring you right now. I just read A Language of Limbs by Dylan Hardcastle. It's a fiction novel. I believe Dylan Hardcastle is from Australia, and it parallels people's lives up to the point that they meet, and it's staged in the AIDS epidemic, and it's just really wonderful piece of queer fiction. So that's my paradigm. Do you have one off the top of your head? Okay, you go first.
Brief shout out, because I already mentioned him, to Tongo Isaac Martin. I was rewatching one of my performances of his a lot, but he has, if you just search him on YouTube, there's like 13-minute, 11-minute videos of him read his poetry. He's really interesting to see read. But he has one poem that begins with, "A lot of God can happen in 3 seconds, not much heaven though." And I just think about that a lot, for one. The other, I'm an anime nerd. Vinland Saga is genuinely one of the best stories that I've ever experienced, and it says a lot about kind of like people, how we are shaped by our world, like the role of violence or lack thereof, etc. Very, very wonderful. And then last one, I'm gonna just shout out a friend of mine. If you have the chance, you should either check out Shade is a Place by Makaisha Tolbert, who is a wonderful individual who writes about trees in a wonderful, wonderful way, or you should check out The Sky Was Once a Dark Blanket by Kinsale Drake, who is one of my other great friends and very, very wonderful. And both of those people actually just won like the National Poetry Series. Well, I guess Makaisha's delayed by a year from Kinsale, but they're both dope. Check them out.
That's been on my reading list for a long time. Yes.
Nice. Amazing. Oh my god, my mind can't think of a book I've ever read. Let me think of what I've read recently. I guess what I've read recently, I've read a lot of Chen recently, which is like just like a rabbit hole I've gone to. Usually when I read a poet, I like read all of their work at the same time. And that was one that I sort of like, whenever I would share, like whenever I share work with people, I find I share like their poems for some reason. So that, I read their first book. I've been reading a lot of first books of poems because I'm trying to write my first book. And so that was the first book that I really, really loved. So yeah, that's it.
Chen's your emergency contact is experiencing an emergency. Yes. Okay, we're wrapped up for the night. Andy and I are very, very grateful that you guys were here. Also, we've been thinking about all the ways that we can make this our own. There's so many ways to do that and so many ways to do a poetry reading, right? But one of the ways is that we decided we were going to change our sign off. And so I'm going to tell you, until next time, open a door. Keep the door open. We love you. Thank you for being here, and get home safe.
I'm sorry.